down, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that fembots are very difficult to do. Due to the differences in body proportions and due to how vehicles work, many companies have had troubles with them in the past. Hasbro's getting really good nowadays, but back then and with third party, there was no chance. Of course, the only chance they would have would be Arcee, but even then, there were a lot of problems. You see how the DX9 version handled theirs? Oh god, that was just no. Even in my completionism days, I just did not bother getting that at all. It just looked complete and utter dog shit. But how did Iron Factory do things? They were a bit more stylized. They had a bit more leeway in playing room. Maybe they could do something interesting. Who knows? Well, it's difficult, because in some ways these are great, but in others, they fall into old habits. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. These are messy. Even for the time, compared to a lot of Transformers on the market, these were seen as lacking in vehicle mode. And a lot of that boils down to two key factors. Firstly, early Iron Factory had a lot of issues with their early vehicle modes in general. They just weren't that great. They were very compromised, and they relied heavily on the IDW aesthetic to turn into things. And secondly, well, fembot engineering. Back then, there wasn't a lot of effort being put into figuring out how they would make it work. Didn't excuse it, but it did kind of show an explanation for it. Arcee, of course, was the front runner, and she kind of shows the best aspects of the molds and the worst. Despite the fact it's very clearly got the arms back here and the legs up here, it is still reasonably swish, but a lot of that comes down to a few key aspects. The front of it is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and yes, the front of it is very much the traditional Arcee backpack. It's just exactly what you'd expect. It's Earthrise before Earthrise was a thing, and you can't particularly remove it. So it is what it is. But a lot of the swishness also comes from the weapon storage, which is required, kinda. To actually have the legs peg into place, you need to keep the gun in there. And then at that point, you might as well store the swords as well. It just kind of works that way. So as a result, if you lose accessories on this, you basically can't transform her. Now that should be a cardinal sin, but given the age of the figure, I am willing to cut it some slack. One thing I'm not willing to cut some slack though is this. They do not stay upright very well at all. Some of them have more success with others, but because this has the gun going all the way back and the swords going all the way back, the weight isn't shifted very well. If you really want to, you can have the swords facing forward to counterbalance it. It is very much an option, but then it ends up looking really stupid, and it doesn't really work all the time anyway, so I tend not to do that. Another issue I take is the way the weapons are. Because the weapons are entirely clear, you can see it start to crack whenever you try to put the feet in there. So far, I've only had that issue on Arcee specifically, not the others, but it is something to be careful when messing with these, which is why I'm exceptionally careful with this version. Aside from that, I guess my other major complaint would be I don't really like the choice of silver for the window. I think it looks a bit out of place. But other than that, it's fine. Got some lovely pearlescent detail up the front. They've even painted some of the rivets on the side here, which they didn't have to because that doesn't even appear in robot mode. But they did, and it looks pretty good. But aside from that, what you see is what you get. It doesn't look that great, and you know that going in because it's pretty obvious in all the photos. Still, at least the spikes on the wrists add some nice contouring at the back here. That's kind of a plus. The second one to release was, of course, Elita 1. Included as a first run bonus for their Optimus Prime, but then they never did a second run, so now every version just comes with Elita 1. Whoop-de-doo, Iron Factory tends to do that. To be quite honest, this is the best out of the bunch. Firstly, the colors are absolutely lovely. They've got sort of a fuchsia going on here with a sort of pink tinted plastic. It's very light pink, very close to white, and that kind of contrast works really well. And ends up hiding a lot of the seams on the side here. Plus, they've got a gunmetal window now, which blends in with the design much better, and I think the hinge also works a bit better. But the biggest reason I prefer this over the rest is the way that the weapons store. When you swap out the swords for these axes, it ends up covering up a lot of the contouring on the sides here. Less so when it's upside down like that, unfortunately, which would have been nice if it was all the way down here. But still, it covers up a lot of the leg messiness. Then you combine the fact that she has a massive rifle at the front, and this just straight up becomes a tank. And the tank itself is pretty decent. Plus, it's the only one that balances without fail every single time. Some of the others you can finagle it, but Elita just balances normally right out the gates. Just fantastic, no problems. Plus, I just really like the clear orange compared to everything else. It just complements it so bloody well. I'm not great on color theory, but I just think this is a winner of a combo. Without a doubt, Elita 1 is the best of all of these. There's just no contests. Following that, we ended up with Nightbirds. yeah, you can see how they all just balance pretty poorly. Nightbird was a convention exclusive. I kind of forget which one it is. I'll go research it and put it on the screen afterwards. I saw it once on TF Source, back when TF Source used to be good. I pre-ordered it, and then I never saw her again. She was produced in extremely low quantities, and although she is very flawed, I am very glad to have her. The black and silver go really well together, as Nightbirds tend to. I always like when Nightbirds go with silver instead of the cartoon accurate stone grey. It's just a really nice color combo, especially with the clear yellow. I don't think the yellow works as well as the orange did on Elite 1, but it complements everything really well. This could hypothetically turn into a really good tank, except instead you've got the sword instead of the rifle. The sides do really well to cover up the mess on the side, but the sword kind of kills it for me. Also, that yellow window, I get what they were going for, but it's both messy and it looks out of place. Just, that's a no from me. It just does not work. It's a figure that I quite like, and it's a figure that I'm very glad to have, but you can see right from here, it's definitely got its issues. I'm pretty sure the last release they did was Combiner Hunter Arcee, which of course released in the first run of Onslaught, except once again, there was no second run of Onslaught. Iron Factory never change. This is so close to being good because the colors are doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. You've got metallic blue on the window, which looks gorgeous, and then the pink striping on the side is just so lush. It really brings this together, and then you've got the lovely transparent purple swords. That's just bloody amazing, but then you get stuck with the giant combiner sword. It'd be fine if they also included a gun to go with it, but they don't really. Also, there is no way that is ever balancing. You can't even turn it around the other way so that it's slicing through the air. I think I have taken some videos of it in another video that'll eventually come out, but it's not meant to do that because then it doesn't actually go in all the way. This is the correct way to do it. It's so close to being great in vehicle mode, and it just fails at the last step. But hey, at least it makes a very nice companion piece to the Combiner Hunter Windblade. They do look quite adorable together, so I do commend them for that. I'm fairly certain Windblade actually released after Combiner Hunter Arcee was done, just as a complimentary piece. Which makes sense, and it was a good way for them to get Windblade back out there again, because usually Iron Factory doesn't reissue their older figures. Which is a very big missed opportunity. They really need to do that more often. But yeah, no, in vehicle mode, Elite 1 is pretty great, and the rest are... they're okay. They definitely have their issues. They are definitely not great. But there is the time period to consider, and there is the fact that back then, people were making fembots. I'm not excusing that shittiness, but it is emblematic of the time. And if you're back collecting, it is something you're going to have to note. But you do have to understand, eventually they would improve. Eventually we would get much better Arcee-alikes. It's just, this wasn't the specific time for them. For those curious, this is the Dr. Wu Combiner Hunter version. It's alright, nothing special. Honestly, I actually find these a lot more special. Because they were trying new things. They didn't quite succeed with them, but at least they kind of tried, whereas Dr. Wu was just kind of eh. Look, I respect what these are doing, even if they don't do it the best. Elite 1 excluded, because she is pretty damn good. Anywho, size-wise, these are roughly 7.9 centimeters long, although it does vary from figure to figure, 3.9 centimeters wide, and 2.9 centimeters tall. And for sizing, here they are next to a standard Legion figure, a standard Core Class figure, a standard modern Micromaster, a standard modern Minicon, a not-so-standard Lego minifigure, and crumbs. Transformation, it's basically what you would expect. You can pretty much see how it's going to work just by looking at it. You remove the swords from the side here. Wow, one of those came off way easier than the other. Remove the feet, bring him down and out of the way, allowing you to get the gun out. Might as well get the feet into place as well. You separate the arms from these tabs at the bottom here. Bring these parts of the backpack back. Use the double hinge to shift the backpack into place. It's originally tabbed in there and there, so it just kind of sits there. I wish there was some more solid locking tabs there, but well, what can you do? Rotate the head around into place. Bring the elbows into place, and you're basically done. She is dead simple. There's nothing there. No thoughts, head empty, just simple transformation. Kind of like the head empty's head sculpt, to be honest. And robot mode, yeah, you can pretty much tell these were the intent of the design. Not to say these don't have issues, they absolutely do. They are essentially Earthrise Arcee, but in Legends form, but at least it makes more sense here given the size. But you can tell that this was the intent of the design, not the vehicle mode. Main Girl Arcee is alright, but there's a few weird choices that I don't particularly vibe with. Across the entire mold, the biggest issue I find with them is just standing. I mean, she's standing okay on this surface, but these feet are really tiny. Their stability is a bit of an issue there. But that's not the worst thing I really take with it. Really, it's just the colors. They've chosen an off-white pearlescent shade for the secondary color, and I'm just not sure it works that well. It's fine, but I just feel it's a little bit dirty in comparison to the rest of it. Also, the head sculpt ain't great. I know it's got that chibi style like the Windblade had way back when, but I don't think it works well for this particular Arcee. She looks a little bit too no thoughts head empty. I just feel she's probably the weakest of these head sculpts wise, even compared to the Combiner Hunter version. Despite being basically the same head sculpt, a lot of that paint helps bring it to life. And of course, the backpack is the backpack. You basically know what you're doing, but that's fine for the time, I guess. Nowadays, we've moved on. We can do much better, but back then, whatever. Articulation is okay. You've got a nice ball-jointed head, ball-jointed shoulders, ball-jointed elbows, ball joints at the hips with an actual thigh swivel in there, which is a nice little bit of attention to detail. Double-jointed knees, thanks to the way that the transformation works. Get some really nice posing that you can't really use with the tiny feet, but at least the feet are ball-jointed, so that eventually you can find a pose that you really do like. Oh, and she's also got a torso swivel. Nice that they included that, even though she's got no waist swivel. There's not really any room with the way the backpack functions. That backpack really is my only other gripe. It just feels like it should tab in somewhere, but it doesn't. It's the one part of all four that I really feel should have been improved, but again, size, price, and time of the figure. So, I guess it's understandable. Weapons-wise, she comes with 3 weapons, as you've seen. One of them is the pistol. It's entirely clear. It's got some reasonable detail on it. I like the kind of diagonal stripes it's got, but aside from that, not really much special. It does engage pretty well with the posing though. You can get some really nice poses with the gun, but that's kind of how most guns work anyway, so I'm not really holding that for it. The swords, on the other hand, are really nice, with nice extra silver coating and a nice little amount of detail. Nothing too crazy, but perfect for this kind of design. She is of course heavily based on the IDW version, at least more so than some of the other figures I'm about to review soon, and these weapons are right up that alley. They're not quite accurate, they're sort of just swords for the sake of being swords. But for this kind of figure, they work immensely well. I don't really have a lot to say about Arcee in general. She's just kind of basic. If there was ever a Legion class in third party, this would pretty much be it. So obviously you're not going to get much aside from the really lovely paint on the torso. Damn, they went all out on the torso of all places. Bit of a weird place to do it. But no, she's simple and she's effective. Nice little cutie patootie to put on your desk. Nothing crazy. Now, if you want something crazy, you go for a Leader 1. This really takes everything up a notch. Everything just looks absolutely gorgeous. There's no coloration issues on this whatsoever. Torso has lovely pink highlights that weren't really visible in the vehicle mode that much. I mean, these highlights on the wrists kind of were, but not that much. Lovely multi-layering on the torso with some lovely silver, and it continues down to the thighs as well, and you've got the nice splitting of this stuff here, where they actually painted the middle parts with a nice fuchsia. The fuchsia is far less pronounced than the vehicle mode, but I still think it works really well. Tolerances are also a little bit better. On Arcee, they were a smidge tight, but here, they feel a lot smoother. There's actually a smidge of retooling on show as well. The chest plate and the shoulders are completely new parts, which is why you've got a nice bit of silver on the spikes there. That was not present on Arcee. You can see they're going for very different vibes. It's not something they had to do, it's something they could have completely ignored, but it's a nice little attention to detail that I really appreciate. Good job, Iron Factory, from however many years ago. The only part I really feel is a bit underdone is the face, but not because it's bad. I do think this is a very nice head sculpt. It just doesn't really feel like a Leader 1. Feels more like Arcee in an Leader 1 cosplay. I guess the aesthetics might not have been compatible, which, you know, fair. It is an Arcee redeco. That's always going to kind of be a thing with that, even on the official ones. Look, it's still a great figure. It's not quite the vibe of a Leader 1, but it does get the job done. Now, weapons-wise, they all have different weapons, and a Leader 1 swaps out the swords for axes, showing that her and Optimus Prime are indeed the Transformers franchise's best power couple. Except she absolutely has the power. There's no way Optimus Prime is a top. These are also very, very lovely. The gunmetal extra bits here really make the design. There's a lot of small details on this that really bring the design to life when it comes to the paint, and I think a Leader 1 embodies most of those with the weapons. The axes are pretty simple. They don't do much except make the alt mode the best of the bunch, along with the rifle, but yeah, they are very nice. And of course, the rifle is also lovely. I don't know why, but this kind of reminds me of a Lego rifle. Something Lego would come up with so they don't have to worry about making war toys. Is it just me? Maybe it's just me. Now, unfortunately, the cannon is not blast effect compatible. I checked, it's not. But I mean, this figure existed long before blast effects were even conceptualized, so yeah, it's fine. It's a tiny little Legion-sized Leader 1 that doesn't quite feel like a Leader 1, but does feel like a damn fine figure. And if you're buying a complete Iron Factory Optimus Prime on the aftermarket, it is a wonderful inclusion, making it a wonderful set. That set in general is just lovely, and Alita fits it just so right. Now, Nightbird, although not my favorite of the bunch, is still really lovely. While she uses the same shoulders from Arcee, the chest plate is, again, a completely different sculpt. Again, they don't have to keep going this hard on all of these figures, but they keep doing it. Slow down, Iron Factory. You don't need to do that much retooling. It's not that necessary. I feel this is easily the best head sculpt of the bunch. It's the only one I don't feel a weird clash with. I think the masked face just fits the aesthetic a lot better, the chibi aesthetic. Maybe that's just me though. The paintwork on the torso is quite lovely, although a lot of the purple does get lost, just because everything's so tiny here. It's so tiny the camera will barely even focus on it. The rest of the paint is absolutely lovely, really brought to life by the silver. I do kind of wish they kept the downward spikes here. Separation that Elite 1 had on the legs with those shins there, but it still is really lovely. There's not a lot to say about this one. It's just a black and purple kind of Decepticon lady, and of course those colors are going to work really well. And of course the Nightbird design is going to work really well in this already fairly nice molds. And I mean, hey, at least the weapons work quite well. The extra peg on the sword is a little bit unsightly, but it's far from the worst case I've seen. And the sword does still look really nice. And the size are also pretty good too. Maybe a smidge oversized, but given the size of this figure, I don't think they could have made them the proper proportions. You kind of got to make some sacrifices in some places. If I had to pick anywhere to make a complaint, it's the eyes. They just don't really work. It's the same paint that they used for this, and the shade is just a little bit too wispy for my taste. Not terrible, and far from ruining the figure, but it is something to note. Rest of it's fantastic though, no complaints. At least in this mode. The vehicle mode definitely suffers from these weapons. But again, the vehicle mode wasn't the intent, the robot mode was. I can see what they're going for. It's just there is a weird dichotomy between robot and vehicle mode. And last but not least, we have Combiner Hunter Arcee, and she's okay. Look, the Combiner Hunter deco is a very difficult deco to get right. So kudos to them at least trying. But I don't really think they succeeded. They got close, but I just don't think doing that sort of deco at such a small scale really works. It needs a lot of small, tiny paint applications to really pierce through the black, and they can't really do that on pieces this small. I mean, you kind of get that with some of the face tattoos. And on the chest and legs, there are extra bits of pink, and I love how they've split down the legs again. One of my favorite things about Elite 1, and now they've finally brought it back, which is quite lovely. And they've even got a little bit on the edges here for the vehicle mode, but a lot of it's just a sea of black. It's just not that great. It's just kind of missing the mark. I am appreciative that this was included with Onslaught. I do think it's a pretty nice inclusion. Not that I think Onslaught isn't worth the $100 price tag on his own. He absolutely is, but this just adds extra value to the pack, so I'm not going to complain that she exists. But trying to do this particular figure at this particular scale, I don't think this deco works. It's a complete odds with what is essentially a Legion figure. That is the size of this figure. It is barely over Legion size. Definitely not core sized. And I understand she is a Combiner Hunter, so of course she's packed in with a Combiner. So if anyone was going to be packed in with Bruticus, it would be her. But she is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, between being great for existing but not that great, and just being fundamentally incompatible with the size. Even the weapons don't particularly work. It's nice that it splits and does all of its extra things to fit in the hand properly. That's some lovely attention to detail. Also, while I'm here, I should also mention that that back panel is a nice spot for a stand port. Really nice double usage of it, so if you do want to use a stand on her, you can. There's a slight problem with using this sword though. I cannot stand it, Mort. I cannot move it. It's a bit of a twofold thing, because as you'll see, the tolerances are way looser compared to the others. Like, over here it's fine, but then you bring it forward and it just starts becoming really loose. Everything is slightly looser. Everything doesn't hold as well. You can get it to stand, but it's a lot harder, and even then, you just gotta balance her just right. There we go. There we go. Okay. Having a giant sword on a figure this small, it's not really going to work. Then you bring in the character design with really slender feet, and then you bring in some of the mold degradation. Yeah, it's not really compatible with the sword. So in general, I think they had the better idea with what they did with the Windblade version of this design. They ended up bulking up the rest of the legs down here so that she stands a lot better. And they didn't use ball joints in those legs either. They used thigh swivels and knee bends. Compared to the regular ball joints in Combiner Hunter Arcee, it was pretty much their first ever mold, and it knocked it out of the park. Compared to this, at least. Look, this isn't a bad figure, but they already kind of knew how to do fembots in this kind of style much better in the past. And even if that was just a fluke, I feel some of those lessons should have been brought over to this one. But hey, at least you still get Arcee's swords, which still look lovely. Less lovely in this transparent purple than the blue was. I think the blue was a lot more luscious, but these are still good. Look, none of these are bad figures. They're just dated and emblematic of the time. You've got Iron Factory's inexperience with making figures like this combined with inferior fembot engineering of the time. Like back then, this was above the standard for fembots. That doesn't make it okay for the time, but it does explain why it was that way. And then in some cases, you've got figures that don't even work at the size they're supposed to work at. Because this deco isn't meant to work at this scale, without modification at least. But they're still painted very well. They're still built mostly well, aside from some tolerance balance issues on Combiner Hunter Arcee, and they still have the adorability factor, so I can't really complain too much. Now, in all honesty, if you were to just get one, I would just get a Leader 1, but she's really just packed in with Optimus Prime, so hunting one down on her own is a bit difficult. But then again, you really should get Optimus Prime because he's brilliant anyway, so I don't really know what to do there. But yeah, they're good. They're just not amazing. Anywho, size-wise, they're all 3.5 centimeters by 8.5 centimeters. And for size comparisons, here they are next to a standard Legion figure. Again, they are really bloody small. A standard core class figure, a standard modern Micromaster, a standard modern Minicon, a not-so-standard LEGO minifigure, and Crumbs. I do quite like these four. I think they vary in terms of quality, but they all kind of fit around the 3 out of 5 mark. The stylization works really well, the engineering is simple and fun, and the alt modes can be good. But by the same token, they are fembots with engineering just shoved in the backpack. They are essentially the Earthrise Arcee mold, just a little bit more posable and a little less clunky, and at such a smaller scale. I think the small size does afford them some more leeway, but even then, they're good, but you gotta know what you're getting into. Still, I do commend Iron Factory getting into these and actually giving them a shot. Not a lot of third-party companies even attempt fembots to begin with, and in terms of Legends figures, most of them just flat out don't. It's Arcee, and that's basically it. I'd really love to see New Age or Magicware or Mech Fans Toys tackle some of the other fembots someday. You know, throw in an Elita 1 that's not a retool of Arcee, or a Firestar, or a Chromia, or a Greenlight, or a Lancer. Something done with the brilliant engineering these companies are known for. For now, though, this is all we have, and I guess they're okay. And even if the Arcee collection wasn't able to show this brilliance, at least they showed they knew their shit. But around the same time, Iron Factory actually released another figure, a figure that showed the true brilliance they were capable of. So tomorrow, I want to talk about one of my third-party favorites. It's not third-party royalty, not a lot of people like this figure, but I love it to absolute bits, and I want to bring it back. See y'all tomorrow!